The White House is attacking Congresswoman Marjorie Taylor Greene for having taken a PPP loan because she's critical of the student debt transfer to the taxpayers from the people who obligated themselves to pay off the debts. In fact, liberals have been pointing out a lot of Republicans who are upset with this were fine with TARP, Donald Trump's tax cuts, and PPP. I realize these are people making partisan points, but it's actually kind of surprising how deeply ignorant they are. And they are ignorant, or willfully so, or maybe just causally, casually ignorant. Let's take PPP first. What was PPP? It was a payroll protection act because the United States government decided the entire nation and all of its businesses needed to be shut down to stop the spread of COVID, and it did not work. Many businesses were going to go under. So the government, because they essentially took their businesses, gave them loans in the form of payroll protection. The payroll protection converted to a grant if the employers continued to pay the employees. If they went out of business, they had to pay the money back. Marjorie Taylor Greene and millions of other Americans not only took the money in compensation for having shut down their businesses, but they continued to pay their employees, thereby keeping the American economy afloat. And also, very important point here, this was a program authorized by the United States Congress, passed both houses of Congress, was funded by Congress, and signed into law by President Trump. Big difference from a student loan bailout when just in the last year, Nancy Pelosi and Joe Biden both said there was no authority for the president to do what suddenly the president has decided he has authority to do. People using PPP for cheap shots, echoed on by a media that already hates Republicans, are partisans who don't really care about facts. They're just trying to circle the wagons around their man. It's actually really notable how many members of the media are also circling their wagons by echoing the PPP talking point. Now let's take on TARP. TARP is a program I opposed, essentially the auto bailout and the bank bailout. The problem is this money was all paid back to taxpayers. In fact, you will recall that the government took shareholder interest in some big corporations, including a couple of car companies like General Motors, as shareholders to make sure the money was getting taken back. The government doesn't appear to be taking a shareholder interest in the lives of the lawyers whose loans are going to be paid back by the farmers. They're just going to let them do this because they vote Democrat. But all the TARP money was paid back. This money in this program is not. And again, TARP was drafted by Congress, approved by Congress, authorized and funded by Congress, and signed into law by the President of the United States. It was not a universal fiat, a unilateral fiat, rather, from the President of the United States. Then there's the Trump tax cut. I know that Democrats like to say this is a tax cut for the wealthy, but it was actually a thorough debunking by multiple outside agencies. And recall, many employees actually got bonuses from their employers with the corporate tax cut. Also, keep in mind the Democrats have been demanding the restoration of SALT, the state and local tax deduction. Why? Because it meant that the rich were actually paying. It's now the Democrats. I know they can't get away from the talking points that the Republicans are the party of the rich, but actually the Democrats are the ones who are the party of the rich, which is why they're doing this student loan bailout. Because who does the student loan bailout actually help? It doesn't help the poor. It doesn't really even help most of the middle class. It helps the upper middle class, fresh out of law school and business school, whose graduate degree loans of $10,000 will get covered as their starting salaries are up to $124,999.99. Not really the middle class, though the Biden White House says it is. And that's for individuals. And it goes up to $250,000 for couples. And so what happens? It is the white, upper income, young people who get bailed out here. It's fundamentally different from the other programs. This actually is a grab bag for white rich kids who have student loan debt and don't want to pay it back, and they don't want to join the military either. They could join the military. They could do service programs for the government, and they could get their debts paid, but they don't want to do that. What they want to do is they want taxpayers, all of us, the working class, the people who paid off their student loans, the 85% of Americans unable to benefit from this, and they want us to cover their debts. Now, the White House can shame Marjorie Taylor Greene all they want and other Republicans. They can point out hypocrisies for TARP, but what they fundamentally miss is the basics that TARP, PPP, these other programs, even the Trump tax cuts, they were done through Congress. They were done through legislative means. This is not being done through legislative means. What the White House is doing is going back to a 2003 law, the HEROES Act, that was designed to help our veterans, our soldiers, our sailors, our airmen and Marines who were losing their lives or limbs in the Middle East, defending this country after 9/11, invading Iraq, keeping the Taliban out of Afghanistan. They're using that in order to fund this program, claiming it's a national emergency, this COVID that is now manageable and winding down, that somehow this emergency, which existed during the first year of the Biden White House when Joe Biden said he had no authority to do this, as it's winding down, he suddenly has the authority to do it without Congress acting, unlike PPP, TARP, the Trump tax cuts, anything like that. A unilateral action by fiat, a power grab by the President of the United States. The precedent this sets is amazing. I suspect Republicans in the future will treat this as a retroactive taxable event to fund reconciliation. And they should tax 100% of the $10,000 and fund whatever program they want up to $300 billion because that's what it's going to cost. They should and they would and they will if they have the guts to do it, because this is unconscionable. It's unconscionable that they would attack Marjorie Taylor Greene for taking PPP, because what did she do with the money? She didn't spend it herself. She actually used it to pay her employees who couldn't go to work because the government shut down her business. Why are you condemning her? You know, I criticize her all the time, but it was commendable of her for taking the PPP when she needed it because her company was shut down, as opposed to Stacey Abrams, who also took PPP to pay her payroll, denying other companies that money when she was bringing in $20 million in contributions to the organization that took out the roughly $500,000 in PPP loans. They don't want to attack Stacey Abrams, though, because she's totally fine with this grab bag of giving from the federal government, and it's not even the federal government. It's the President of the United States who's doing it without authorization from Congress, unlike all of these other programs. All the Democrats who have complained about Donald Trump and the precedents of Donald Trump, do you not think that a future Republican president, a Ron DeSantis or a Trump 2.0, won't use these sorts of precedents to reward his friends and punish his enemies? And who are their friends? The working class, the middle class, the people who are responsible and did the hard work. The farmers, the electricians, the plumbers. Now, you Democrats are thinking, of course, that, well, the college-educated vote more often than the non-college educated, so we'll be fine. I think you might have pissed all those people off now who are going to be bailing out these young lawyers and doctors and dentists and bankers and financiers who are only just now out of law school or finance school making $100,000 a year. The electrician who makes $70,000 a year, going to be pretty pissed. He's going to have to pay bankroll this. And by the way, it's worth noting that all of this will go to future generations where they will see either increased taxes or they will see a decrease in services, further compounding the burden on the poor who the Democrats claim to help. Well, really, they're helping their rich future donors and voters, mostly white, who will do quite well in the world. Listen, if the government's going to benefit you, if you're going to get to pay this off, I don't fault you for taking advantage of it. Don't fault you at all. But let's be clear-eyed about what's actually happening. This compounds the national debt, which is going to cause future tax increases and future decreases in services. Because even if you tax 100% of the money of the wealthy out there, you can't pay off the national debt. It's too big. It's over $30 trillion. This adds $300 billion to it. You take 100% of Jeff Bezos and Elon Musk's money and all the other billionaires out there, you still don't have enough. You still don't have enough to pay off the national debt that this adds to. And as it adds to it, it causes an increase in payments to service the debt. And as interest rates go up because this provokes inflation, it increases the amount of interest payments, which decreases the amount of money for the general services of the government of the United States, all by unilateral fiat by the President of the United States, who instead of defending the program now is trying to point as hypocrisy to members of Congress like Marjorie Taylor Greene, who actually used a program that Congress passed and funded and a president signed into law, unlike this, to benefit her actual employees without shifting the burden to the overall taxpayers. She took care of her employees and kept them out of unemployment, kept them in employment, and brought them back to work when her business opened. And now Joe Biden is taking the people who Marjorie Taylor Greene kept off the unemployment line and forcing them to pay the money of the Democratic donors who are in their 20s, overwhelmingly white, and overwhelmingly make $75,000 a year or more on their way to earning millions. It is an immoral policy, but more than that, it's a unilateral fiat by the President of the United States, who a year ago said he had no power to do this, who Nancy Pelosi said had no power to do this, and suddenly, miraculously, a couple of months before the midterm elections, as the Democrats need to ensure young, college-educated white Democrats turn out to vote for them, they suddenly found a power that no one had found before, and in fact, the Education Department, which now says they could do it just last year, said, nope, we can't do it. And what did they use? They used a program for those in the military, the HEROES Act. They used a program designed to help our actual heroes. And now they're going to use it for the losers of society who got great grades and went to law school and business school. And now they want the blue-collar workers of America to bail them out. These people aren't heroes. They should be ashamed. There are some people who will have real legitimate sob stories who might benefit from this. But keep in mind, the independent data, not from conservative think tanks, but from Wharton School of Business, shows 60% are people at the beginning of earning a lot of money, $75,000 a year or higher. More than half have graduate degrees and will go on to high-income earnings. There's no justice here. All the theologians out there on the left saying that Christians are about forgiveness. This isn't about debt forgiveness. It's about a debt transfer. It's not forgiveness of debt. It's about taking on the debts of others. If anything, the working class is now in the Christ-like position of having to suffer for the sins and debts of Joe Biden's voters. And what will Joe Biden do? Well, he'll be the guy on the cross mocking the Christ.